Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the First Principles podcast. My name is JC, and in this episode, I want to talk about one of my favorite characters in history, and that is Teddy Roosevelt. The reason why I love this man is because he is a prime example of how, through hard work, perseverance, and a clear vision, we can achieve massive results and actually create real change in people's lives. And what I want to break down today is a couple principles that I wrote down as I was reading about him and watching a documentary about him that I believe can really help us to develop the character traits that we need in order to become the best version of ourselves. So, the first principle is to choose a strenuous life. One thing that we see with Teddy Roosevelt is that he believes that comfort is a weakness for people, and he intentionally looks for difficult experiences, not because he believes that suffering is inherently good, but because hardship reveals and develops our character. So from a young age, he actually has these huge asthma attacks. He is somebody that is actually pretty weak and frail, and his father actually teaches him to work out and to push his body to the limits. And from there, he ends up becoming a boxer for a little bit while he's in college. And he's constantly pushing that envelope of how can I become stronger? What am I capable of? There's even stories about him where he would go into the wilderness with a biscuit and a tea bag and just try to survive to see where his limit is. And the strategic principle that we get from this is that growth lives just beyond voluntary discomfort. And people avoid situations that exposes weaknesses because they believe that's going to make them look bad. But what TR says is the opposite. He intentionally finds those weak points because that is exactly where his next training plan is going to start. So most people live in the shadow of their ego, afraid to push themselves because they tremble at the thought of failing or not being good enough. But Teddy says the contrary is true. Your limits are not weaknesses or points of failure that you must toughen up in order to create a better life. So test yourself, push yourself, and find the limits, and then get to work. And the way that I like to think about things is you have a principle, an overlying principle, and then you have rules. And what the rule is how do you apply that principle in your life? So for this one, I would say that the rule is if you want to achieve your goals and overcome life obstacles, you must choose a path of most resistance, for this builds up your strength and your character, which leads to perseverance. Okay, but now, obviously, as all good things, it can go too far, and that's where we have to understand. Okay, well, where does this rule break? I would say that the point of failure is where you're pushing yourself through unnecessary hardship, self-inflicted hardship that does not correlate to the outcome that you're pursuing. So you have to be smart in choosing the voluntary hardship to make sure that it's in line with the outcome and the overall vision that you want. Because if not, you're just doing dumb, hard stuff for the sake of doing hard, dumb stuff. And even with Teddy, we see that the fact that he goes into the wilderness is actually a predecessor for his ability to become a president, because he constantly says that the time that he spent in the wilderness actually strengthened him up to become the man that he is today. So you have to be smart in choosing your battles and knowing, does this hard thing that I'm about to do, does it actually correlate to the thing that I want to build? Principle number 2, understand people before you try to lead them. This is one of Teddy's best gifts. It is so interesting seeing how he has this ability to just talk to people, relate to people. And you see him talking with people that are rich, poor, cowboys, politicians, immigrants, workers. And what he does is he asks questions, he listens, and he makes people feel important. He uses a bunch of humor to remove that barrier and make people see that he's actually human. So now the strategic principle that we get from this is that leadership begins with understanding before influence. You can't solve people's problems if you don't understand them, and you can't inspire people that you don't know. And why I think this is so important today is because we are so obsessed with our opinions, our politics, our worldview, that we forget that the same way that you believe something, somebody else believes about another thing. And one thing that I thought a lot about this is I don't believe that I'm a dumb person and I have my opinions. And then I know people that I know are really smart and they have different opinions. So the question becomes, well, Are they dumb, or is it that they understand things that maybe I don't understand? And that's why I think it's so important to be open to actually asking questions and having a genuine curiosity of understanding why somebody believes something different, not so much, oh, let me, move you into my camp of how I believe. And the rule that I found with this is, if you want to be an agent of change, then listen more than you speak. Ask more questions, follow up, and be more genuinely curious. Make people feel seen and heard and loved. One of the worst things I encounter that I know a lot of you can relate is that person that you're talking to, that they're just waiting for you to finish so they can say something else. And I think that's why it's so important to make sure that you're always doing follow-up questions. A rule that I like to do is to ask at least 2 to 3 follow-up questions to make the person feel heard and make sure that they know that I'm actually genuinely interested in what they're saying. Now, where does the rule break? I would say that if you're talking with somebody that is clearly mean, disrespectful, dangerous, self-destructive, I think at that point it is better to just walk away and just tell them, hey, you're right, you're smarter than me, and just move on. Principle number 3, transform suffering into growth. The day that should have been the happiest for TR ended up being the most tragic. The day that his baby girl was born, both his wife and mom passed away. And on February 14th, 1888, in his personal diary, he drew a giant X and he wrote, "The light has gone out of my life." And what we see is that TR gravitates to hard work. And after the loss of his family, he actually retreats to North Dakota, to the Badlands, to this like desolated place where he owns a ranch, and he actually becomes a cowboy. And he uses his time to build himself up and build his body, his mind, and his spirit. And what we see is that Teddy is not escaping. Rather, he is taking some time to actually discover who he is and find those weak points and build himself up. And that's a huge difference. It's not a distraction. It's a rebuilding of himself. And the strategic principle here is that pain at the end of the day is unavoidable. Whether it becomes destruction or transformational is a choice. And what this means is that when we're going through something hard, when we have a loss of a loved one, or we're experiencing massive pain, we have a choice of what we do with that pain and that loss and those emotions. Anger, despair, sadness, those are really strong emotions. And what Teddy's trying to illustrate is that you can actually put those emotions to good use instead of letting them destroy you. Because I would argue that we all know people, and maybe this has even been ourselves, where when bad stuff happens, we retreat to things that may numb the pain instead of working hard towards something different. And what TR is saying is this is an experience and energy that you can use to rebuild yourself up into a better person. And I think the reason why he chooses physical labor is because when you're working with your hands, that gives your brain space to think. And that is exactly what TR is doing at that moment. He is working hard. He is giving himself that space. Also, the fact that he's working hard is relieving his stress, and that gives his brain time to think. And he actually goes through journaling and a bunch of stuff and writes down ideas and is able to overcome the sadness through that hardship. So the rule here is, if you truly want to overcome devastation, pour yourself into a productive activity. Use the energy to rebuild yourself rather than destroy yourself, to process through the events as you work. And that's exactly what we've been talking about. Now, where does the rule break? I think the rule breaks when the work becomes a way to compartmentalize exactly what you're going through. And the hard work at the end of the day has to be a spotlight for your thoughts to rest on rather than a drawer in which you hide them away. And what I mean by this is that when you're doing this physical labor, when you're doing this hard work, it should give your mind space to think rather than just focusing on that so you don't have to think about what's actually going on. Principle number 4, never ask others to face risks that you wouldn't face yourself. This one is one of my favorites. One of the things that Teddy does is he is always on the forefront of every movement that he wants to see happen. When the Spanish-American War breaks out and they go to Cuba, he is the first one to be there in the trenches. And it is so refreshing because you're seeing a leader that actually walks the walk instead of just talking the talk. And in today's world, it's usually the contrary. We see leaders that are expecting more of their people, expecting more of their employees, pushing them to the limits without pushing themselves. And that is why they're not seeing all the results that they want, because they are putting these expectations on people without giving them the why and without giving them the example of how to push forward. So the principle here is example creates commitment while position creates compliance. We've all seen businesses or have been part of a business or have had a boss that pushes you to your limits but doesn't give that example back. And what happens is it creates resentment, it creates anger, because you're not seeing that person do the same work or live up to the same standard that they're aspiring to. And I would say that more often than not, we see leaders in corporate and government talk the talk but not walk the walk. And we even see business leaders and managers asking a lot from their employees but not putting in the work themselves. And when we look at great leaders like Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, Elon Musk, there's this thread in which they never ask others what they wouldn't do themselves. And to the point where we see Elon Musk literally sleeping on the floor of SpaceX at 3 a.m. while everybody else is working as well. He is somebody that pushes his team, but his team knows that he is there as well. So team members need to see you actually doing the work and actually pushing so they can actually believe, because what you need is credibility. It shows that you're a leader worth following because you believe in the vision and in the concept that you're trying to make happen. And because of this belief, people start following you. So the rule is, if you want your followers to believe in the vision, then give them a compelling why and run into battle with them. One of the major things, like we said, that we see with Teddy is that he's in favor of the Spanish-American War, and he is the first one to be out there. He is leading the charge. There's this scene where basically he is on horseback running towards the enemy, knowing that he's a prime target, but he knows that he has to be the one to push his men forward. And that's exactly what we need in our leaders. Leaders are willing to put in the work and actually be in the forefront of the mission. Now, what breaks it? What I believe breaks it is when what the leader is asking is clearly foolish. Not risky, but foolish. I would say that there's a big difference, right? Because risk means that the gain is worth the sacrifice, while foolish is that the gain is not worth the sacrifice. So one thing that leaders have to be careful here is to make sure that what they're asking about their employees or their team members is actually something worth pursuing. And the big difference here is that we have to be able to give our people the right information so they understand exactly what the mission is. Because when you don't have the right information, you don't have all the information, you might think that an idea is foolish. But now, if your leader comes and says, hey, you know what, the reason why we're doing this is because of this sequencing, now it makes sense. So a leader has to be really careful of actually being able to convey the vision, convey the why, and then being on the trenches with his people, fighting for whatever it is that they're trying to build. Principle number 5, courage is built, not born. One thing we see with TR is that he always acted before he felt courageous. One thing that TR explains is that people are not naturally brave. Rather, they choose to constantly do what they're afraid of, and that's what creates the skill of fearlessness and courage. So then people see that and they think, wow, this person is so fearless. But the fact that they're fearless is because they have built this skill by always pursuing and doing what they're afraid of. And the great thing with this is that bravery is not inherited. Rather, it's something that anybody can build. And TR, during his time in the Badlands, he explains all these moments where he was afraid, but he persevered. So one example is he would always choose the hardest horse to break. And the reason why he did that is because he was afraid of that. So he believed that if he was afraid of something, if he acted like he wasn't afraid, and did that repeatedly, he wouldn't be afraid. So that is just something so beautiful where heroes are not born, they're made. The reason why this principle is so important is because people miss out on becoming the version of themselves because they think that they're born with the wrong abilities. And at the end of the day, it's a skill set. Everything is a skill set. Action comes before belief. At the beginning, you're not seeing the results, you're not seeing the win, so of course it's hard because you're not seeing what you want to see. But by doing the small actions that are going to take you there, you're going to start to see the results, and you're going to build up that belief that you are who you say you are. And that's what Teddy is saying. You have to act as if. So if you're somebody that wants to become great in finances, but you suck at it, act as if. Apply the lessons, the habits, the things that people do that are great with money. And then by doing that consistently, you're going to see that sooner or later, you're going to become that version of yourself that you want to be. And it's all because you just did the things that you're supposed to do. So the rule here is that if you want to achieve an outcome that you see in your mind, despite not having evidence, then you have to create that evidence through consistent action. And what that means is that you have to choose exactly what you want to achieve, exactly what you want to do. And then daily, you have to do these small actions that take you there. And then as you build this up, you're going to build a repertoire of evidence. So then when it gets hard, you're going to be able to look back and say, well, I was able to actually get through A, B, and C, so I can for sure get through D. So now, what breaks this rule? I would say that taking risks for risk's sake is exactly what breaks this rule. Doing something that is dangerous, thinking that somehow it's brave, is not the way to go. So we have to make sure that the decisions that we're doing are not impulsive, but rather that they are part of the bigger picture, so we don't lose exactly what we're trying to do. So don't take risks you don't need to take. Take the risks that are going to lead you to the life that you want, and make sure that those things are in line with themselves. So to wrap this one up, the strategic principle here is that action changes identity more than belief changes identity. What a lot of people think is that you get the confidence and then you act, but what TR is saying is you act and then you get the confidence. And this is something that is repeated by a lot of entrepreneurs. You have to act before the belief comes. So number six, and the last one for today is one of my favorites, and that is to give everything to today's work. One thing that TR says is that so many people are obsessed with the 5-year plan, the 10-year plan, and they become too careful in their decision making. And what TR says is give everything to the work today, because that's going to open up the doors of tomorrow. So the principle is excellence compounds when you focus on today's responsibilities instead of tomorrow's title. So wherever you are right now, focus on giving everything to that job, and giving everything to that job is going to basically give you the evidence that you need for the other doors to open up. That way, whenever you want to move, you can say, look at all the work that I did for this company. Look at all the work that I did for this charity. Look at all the work that I did when I was in government, right? And then people believe that you're capable because you've done it before. So that wraps up for today, guys. Thank you so much for listening to this. I am so excited to be sharing all this with you. The point of this podcast is to share ideas that I believe are valuable and can transform lives. So please give me a follow, and I'll see you on the next one.